Hello, welcome back to Motorsport and Scale. In this episode, which should be episode 5 of the Maserati 250 build, it's going to be working a little bit on the chassis. We got the engine all done. As you see in the instructions there, up to the end of step 5, more or less. I've left off a few pieces to facilitate fitting it to the chassis. Today I'm going to be working on the chassis. Obviously, well, as you can see here, and what we worked on before, we'd already built up the basic frame. So today I've been working a little bit on getting the suspension parts cleaned up. You can see right there, they're test fit. They're just dry fit. The pins aren't even in right now. They're just sort of sitting there. There's little tabs that hold everything more or less where it's supposed to be. So then the bolts go in. They're just pins which will hold everything in place. The spring and mount should hopefully set the ride height to be the proper ride height. There's no direction given there on any measurements, which is a little frustrating. So we're working on that. Get the front part of the frame all done. I might change up the order here. Like, I probably won't be going and put the where are we? Go and put the engine in right away. I'll probably work on a bit more of the front stuff. I might have to fit the engine and just get these hoses and whatnot bent back to shape and everything so that they fit in properly. And before I actually go and stick the engine in, and then this step's just building up the radiator, putting the shock absorbers on, and the linkage for that. So I might sort of get all that suspension and front end done before I put the engine in. And I'll test fit as I go to make sure that I can still put the engine in, obviously. But that's sort of the way I want to do this, because it just makes it much easier to work on all this little stuff when the engine, which is finished, isn't in there. And plus I can still test fit, and then sort of next it goes to getting the engine installed. Getting the transmission transaxle built up and all installed in the rear frame. And I don't know if you remember, I was talking about what I was going to do with that and some strategy I was going to try to employ. There's this top piece here, obviously fits up here. And these joints, when you're looking down into the car, actually, no, you can't see these ones here. You might be able to see these ones a bit. But I want to build this thing up so I can photograph the chassis when it's complete without the bodywork on it. So I'm not too keen on having these two joints as glue joints. I want to solder and finish them. And I was going to try to figure out a way of getting the transmission in here with this top plate in. This is the top mount to the transmission, so more like it gets sandwiched in here. It's captured between the upper and lower part of the chassis. So if this is in, there's no way of actually getting the transmission in there properly. I might be able to cut the mounting lugs off, and then it would just sort of sit there. But I think it would still be a bit of a tricky task. So what I've decided to do, I've got the transmission all built up here. It went together fairly well. No real issues with it. Everything fit more or less the way it's supposed to. And I've got it so it fits in the frame okay now. Everything needs a little tweaking and bending to get everything to line up as usual with model Factory Hiro. It sits in there this way is the orientation that it sits in there. So what I've decided to do is I'm gonna, obviously I'm gonna get the engine transaxle complete, get it all painted and ready to go. And then I will more or less finish all the bottom part of the chassis, of this part of the chassis, get everything painted. But I won't paint up to these joints. I'll leave it not quite finished. So essentially leave the top part done. And then, you know, throw the transmission in, get the top plate on. I'll solder these joints, and then I'll just mask off, or just use, it's fairly easy to block this off so that I can then paint the areas that I needed to join. Like, I'll just leave these little bits unpainted. I'll get this all painted except for these little areas where I need to solder, and just come in and touch it up. So I think that's my strategy. That's what I'll do. It'll look best in the end. So to that end, I've done, like I said, I got the transmissions already. I got a couple other pieces for the transmission sitting over there waiting to be primed. I've got the front suspension more or less. Let's get the instructions out of the way. More or less all test fitted now. All the holes drilled that need to be drilled. That sort of thing. So we're well on our way. I think the engine was a big part of this kit. Like, I think this little this step, sort of the chassis here, is going to be fairly quick. Then it'll slow down a bit for a bunch of little details for the rear drive, the rear suspension, and all that. But really, it's not that complicated. Pretty simple vehicle. It's not a simple kit, but it, fairly simple vehicle. But a lot of little parts coming up. Like, I'll do this episode probably right up until I've got. I was going to say up until I've got sort of this part done, but probably not. I'll probably get the pedals and everything in, and I want to get the this top piece. Sorry, you can't see that. I want to get the top piece, like I showed you here, installed, and that all painted, so that the major front and rear assemblies are more or less done. I still got some test fitting to do. I want to get everything cleaned up before I test fit the front and back and get the final fit on there. There's a little bit of finagling to get that perfect. I also got a little bit of work to do on the way the fuel cell mounts. Remember, it appeared that the fuel cap hole was off center, so I want to see if I can get that fitting better so that it is centered. So a bit of test fitting to go, but in term, I want to get all the parts sort of ready to go along the way, like all the suspension parts. Like I say, this is just all sitting there, so get all those ready to go, so that once I do have the chassis done, it's just a matter of a bunch of assembly. And then I'll have this frame, the other frame. Like I said, a little bit more work just on fine-tuning the fit. And then the fuel tank fit, I'll have to bolt the body all back on and then tweak that. But before I can really do that, I do need to fit all these other little pieces, at least have everything test fit and all the fitment issues resolved. Because that's kind of the last thing, is joining the two chassis components and the fuel cell being on there. So yeah, that's sort of my strategy. Not quite sure, like, that sounds like a lot, and it's a bit, not really a much of the actual work. I'm gonna throw the camera on, because it's a bunch of doing the same thing over and over again, like cleaning up parts, cleaning up the tubes and whatnot, seam lines. There's not really much soldering, and I've already showed soldering before. There's not really much of that left to do. So it's just more or less basic cleaning stuff. And, typically what I use, just, a sanding file. This is just stainless steel chunk with whatever sandpaper, double-sided tape to it. I got these ones are just a chunk of acrylic, and I usually put the same grit on both sides, so a sponge on one side and sanding film on the other side. I use files, the cutters, drilling holes. That's a lot of this is drilling holes and cleaning that, and cleaning. That's big chunk of building these things. Drilling holes, cleaning, and aligning. Straightening stuff out. That's sort of the three big things, time-consuming things. Painting parts and all that and getting everything, once you get everything prepped, the painting part's the easy part, in my opinion. It's the most enjoyable part, too. But it's unfortunately the lowest. It actually doesn't constitute much of the work that's being done on these things. So, anyways, that's where I am right now. I'll check in periodically as I go, and give you updates, and we'll try to keep you involved in this one. All right, so we'll check in soon. Wanted to update you on what I'm doing. We're working on getting the chassis all prepped and ready to paint. Working on the front suspension, I think, and then I'll move on to the gearbox and everything there. And I think I talked about how I'm going to approach that, which hasn't changed. But I just thought I'd do a bit of a pause on that work because, I'm really working towards getting the chassis done. Start painting it and whatnot. But I wanted to make sure, I kind of did a rough fit of the fuel tank earlier when we were sort of prepping everything. But I wanted to make sure that I got the alignment good on the tank before I really start finishing some parts out. So this is sort of the last big super critical thing to ensure alignment so that final assembly goes well for the body. Everything else up here is going to be fine. There's tons of room for the radiator. We've already figured that out. And we got everything else fitting good here. I'll have to do the cowl for the windshield. That's going to be a pain in the butt, but I don't really need to worry about that, as it interrelates with the chassis and the body. So anyways, yeah, I had to tweak the locations. I don't know if you remember. The hole for the fuel filler wasn't quite aligned with the hole in here. And I put some tape because I had some interference on the inside here, so I just left myself a note there to make sure I worked out any interference problems with this. So anyways, I did a bit of tweaking. It actually didn't take much. It was pretty darn close. So that this will just slip on. I really wish I could make this so it was removable. But there's just, I put these little pins in, and they're a pain in the butt to get lined up, but just because they're so small and finicky, but it lines up. I need to kind of hold it up. There's one screw from the bottom, and that's what mounts it, but I don't think, I'll see if I can get this joint to stay tight with just that bolt, but I doubt it because, as you can see, gravity will just pull this down. So if you put a bolt in the bottom and start tightening, it'll naturally pull it down as well. So it's unfortunate, but I think this is going to have to get glued. There's not enough surface or anything in this area here in these 2 points to even put magnets in or anything. There's just nothing there. It's such a tiny little fit point or whatever. There's just no material anywhere to do anything, so it'll probably have to get glued. I was thinking there for a bit, to see if I could do magnets on the front and the rear, and then have the main body permanently assembled, but then have the front and rear be able to take off, because It'd be kind of interesting to display it that way, but that's not going to happen, I don't think. I'm going to have to glue it here to get this thing to stay together and look presentable. So anyways, I might do it with the nose. We'll see how it all works out in the end. But anyways, I've got everything. It still looks like it's sitting a little far back. It looks pretty central now, like down the center line, so that's good. It does look like it's sort of sitting back a bit, but the way I just have this assembled, the chassis is kind of sagging a bit. So once I get the two halves of the chassis, the front and rear part, together, it actually pulls it up and centers this a little bit better. And the rear, you can't really see it here. There's also a filler port there. That's what this opening's for, so it'll be another little filler for, that's the oil tank back there. This is the fuel tank. So anyways, and I got the inside of this clearance so nothing's touching, so it should just all slip together when it comes time for assembly. Fingers crossed. The only thing that's missing out of here is there's two photo etch bands that go here, which are bands that hold this tank on. But they're thinner than, this has got a raised lip right here that's not touching. And they're thinner than that. This one here, it looks like, you can see there's enough clearance there, so we should be good. There's actually little feet or little pads there, and I think those are located where those bands are. Actually, no, the one in the back's farther back. So anyways, we'll see how that goes. It might need a little bit more clearancing. Obviously, I'll have, once I get this all assembled and done, I won't do any of the, I'll leave the body for last, because if it does interfere, I'll need to tweak, sand out some on the inside of this or whatever and get the body tweaked before I have any paint on it. I don't want to go ahead and paint the body until I know it's going to fit the assembled chassis. So anyways, just a quick check in there. I just ended up having to tweak where it sat here a little bit, and it also, it sits on, you know, it sort of sits on these two things. There's little alignment pins here. One of them I actually had to cut off because it just wasn't working. So it sort of sits on the back of these two legs, and then it sits in this saddle here. So anyways, I got it so it more or less just drops in now. It's nice and tight. It's held securely. You know, be able to glue it there and at the back, and then the bands will also hold it on much like they do in real life. So yeah, and then this will just slip on, except for it doesn't quite slip on because my dowels are a little crooked. If they were straight, it would slip on easy, but yeah. Hey, just a quick check-in here. Little progress update. As you can see, the bench is an absolute disaster. This is typically what happens. It all starts out nice and clean, and then it quickly devolves into a bit of a catastrophe. So anyways, I just left it like this. I want to turn the camera on, and what I've been doing is cleaning up all the white metal parts needed for the next couple steps. And it's my least favorite task because it's messy. And there's no two ways around that. You know, it's the exact same process as cleaning up plastic. You know, I'm removing seam lines, you know, getting rid of flash, whatever it might be. You know, same you do on a plastic model. Same tools, you know, for the most part. You know, like depending on the scope of it, I might have to bust out the file, you know, and I use a pretty coarse file in some cases, various sandpapers, you know, and I just have a set that I use for white metal. You know, sometimes I'll just, like some of this, I had to clean up some resin parts, and I'll use the same ones. It gets them all dirty, but I wash all my stuff after I've prepped it before I paint it, so it's not really that big of a deal. So anyways, this is the mess that ensues. And like I say, it's not my favorite task. It's time consuming, it's messy, and it's monotonous. But it's one of those things that I think separates a really good build from a okay build. And I kind of land somewhere in between. I don't always strive for 100% perfection. I'll leave some seam lines if they're not readily apparent. I'm not cleaning up shit you can't see. Same with putting detail on stuff that you can't see. I don't see the point in that. Not knocking anybody that does that, but for me, it's conceded effort. You put the effort in where it's going to be recognized. So, anywho, that's just me, I guess. And I guess it kind of depends on the project too, and what I want out of it. So, anyways, that's a bit of a sidetrack digression. That's not really what I wanted to talk about. We just had to glue some stuff up, just talk about a few things. I think I touched on earlier what sort of my plan with the chassis was and this piece and how I was going to tackle all this. One of the other issues, I don't think I talked about this, was this top piece has, I don't know if you can see him there. I should stop and clean the bench up to get stuff to focus better. Let's get that focus there. You can see there's pins there, right? Well, I put those pins there. Those are just some chunks of 1.6 mil aluminum, 1/8 inch, or no, 1/16 inch aluminum rod, or tube, actually. I think they're tube. Yes, they're tube. So originally the part had, come on, focus back on that. Originally the part had just a little nubbin on it that would index into this firewall piece. There's holes here, right there. And they were just deep enough, and this is quite thin. It's only about 1 mil thick, just to index that. And then the other part of the chassis, which I don't have in front of me right now, goes onto this, and then those tubes, actually in real life, it's one tube that goes up to the front that runs all the way to the back. But that was just a butt joint there. That's just butts up to there. So there's nothing really at the top of the chassis. Like when you join the two halves together, at the bottom there's 2 screws on each side that you bolt this on. But there's nothing at the top that really sort of sucks it in. And that's where the last time when I was talking about this sagging, that's what I was talking about. You got to glue it, obviously. Use some adhesives to pull it together, but so that's why I extended these. So I extended these so they'll go through and index into those top tubes, and it gives another glue point. I'll put a bit of epoxy in those, and that'll be plenty strong enough. Because when this thing's sitting there, that's going to be a compression force applied. When it's actually sitting on, it's got little stands, it's got little plinths that it sits on, but it's still going to create a compression force. It's going to cause this to go this way. That's the way the force, and this will be a shear force on the bottom, and that one's bolted, so that's good. But so it'll naturally cause it to close up. But if you pick it up, that the force is reverse. So I just want to make sure that the top is strong, and it also keeps the back end picked up and the tank aligned properly. Yada yada yada. So that will solve that problem. The other thing I figured out was how I can get the transmission in with all this assembled. So basically all I did was cut the pin off on the inside here. It had a fairly big pin. So with this all assembled and tight, I can get the transmission up through the bottom and get it and squirrel it in there, and it'll just click in. So that's good news. That means I can assemble this as one assembly. The bad news is, the frame is a light gray color. This is natural aluminum finish. So I'm going to have to, before I install this, I'm going to finish the firewall and the floor pan in aluminum, and then mask it up, solder this on, clean those joints up, and then paint the frame gray, the light gray. So it's a bit more work just the way that I did this, because I wanted this floor pan and bulkhead soldered together to give it maximum strength instead of it being a glue, because that's, this bulkhead in the floor pan is what the front frame assembly bolts do, not the actual frame itself. So not the best design from a robustness, standpoint. So that's why I wanted to solder this. It's going to be much more stable long term in terms of not falling apart. So anyways, that's that. I'll just give you a quick shot. It doesn't look like much sitting on here, but here's all these parts. This is all the front end stuff. Let's get that out of there so I can set this down. This is all the front end stuff. Cleaned. It's all been de-seamed, sanded, washed, ready to prime and paint. So this is the rad support. I polished it up to 10,000. This is going to be brass, so it's a bit of an experiment. The camera doesn't do this justice. It's picking up all the fine scratches on it, but it's extremely smooth and quite shiny. So I'm doing a bit of an experiment on this to see if it works out. So that's why I polished it. Now, if I use a high gloss brass color over the clear primer, I should get a high gloss brass out of it. That's the theory. We'll see how that turns out. I'll keep you up to date on that one. If it's a fail, it's a fail. We'll go with just a painted brass look, but I'm hoping that will give it a nice polished metallic brass look. So anyways, I got all these parts, and this is basically all the parts for this front part of the chassis, right, to get that front section. And that would theoretically get us up to, where are we? I'll get it up to the end of step 9 is where that would take us, more or less. Parts where you have front and rear the exact same, I've included them here just so that when I paint them, they end up being the same color. I don't forget what I did. So that's more or less. There's a couple parts in here from a few steps ahead. Same with building this hoop out on the frame. They actually have you do that quite a few steps ahead, but I test fit everything to make sure that I could still assemble everything around that, the front suspension and the radiator and everything, and it'll work fine. So I don't know why they have you do that later in the build. I wanted to solder it, so now it's the time, so that's all soldered on there. There. So, I can build everything around that with it on it, so that shouldn't be an issue. So I just went ahead and did that, got everything else straightened out, so this is ready to go. But yeah, and then I went ahead, because I don't hate, but I don't like this parts cleaning part. It's not my favorite activity of model making. Straightening this stuff out and making it fit, I enjoy doing that. So I don't mind the white metal. It's a pain. I've bitched about it in the past. It's a pain that everything's bent, more or less everything, and you got to do a lot of work to get everything to fit. But I actually do enjoy that aspect of it, like getting stuff to fit. So that part I don't mind. It's just cleaning it up I don't like. But so anyways, bench is a mess. I'm a mess. So I carried on. And like I've shown you before, when I go through the kit originally and do the initial cleaning and everything, I catalog everything by steps and put it in bags. So that's what we got here. So I've gone and cleaned all these parts. I've got all the way up to step 19, all the parts cleaned up. So that's all those are more or less de-seamed, polished. They're not fully, I've straightened things out that are obviously bent, but they all still need to be fit and fettled into position. So that's pretty much everything, rear suspension, everything up to just about getting the tank installed, including I went to the extent of parts that needed to be soldered, whatnot, like this tank here. This is the I think it's a fuel transfer tank. I'm not sure. To be honest with you, this was 2 parts that needed to be soldered together. You can barely, I think, still make out where the solder joint is. It's right along there. Let's see, you can see in the, yeah, let's see here in the instructions. Right, it's 2 pieces that came together. So I soldered that together and then just file it down and sand it to get more or less seamless finish, right? It's good enough. I'll paint this. I'm not going to do it in a polished metal look. So I'll prime it, and if there's any slight imperfection, a little bit of filler will take care of that. But for the most part, this probably won't need anything for filler. And that's, in my opinion, the beauty of soldering this stuff together. It's super easy to do. It's fairly strong. It's not super strong, though. It's not welding, so it's still, a dissimilar materials bonding together versus, melting stuff together, which welding would be, where soldering is not welding. And it's not as strong as, let's say, if we brazed it or something like, which you can do with this. But anyways, it's worth learning how to do it, I think, because it gives you the best chance. Like I say, these are soldered, and then just a bit of time with the file and some sanders, and you can't tell that it's a soldered joint. That's same with the radiator, right? I'll show you that. This was a multi-piece setup. There was 2 pieces actually. So it was this top piece is one piece, and then the bottom sort of a C is another, and the joint is actually right there. You can't see it, and that's the point, right? Like that was soldered and then polished, and there's no visible joint there. Same on that side. So that's a huge benefit. You couldn't do that with some type of adhesive, either epoxy or super glue. You just could not do that. So that's a huge benefit of it, in my opinion. So it's worth investing some time to figure out that skill, right? I think when you're dealing with these kind of kits, but the reality is this stuff, I don't know, it's intimidating, these kits, but the reality is they're not really any different than a plastic model kit. They got a lot of parts, so I guess that's part of the intimidation. It's different materials, so that's a bit of the intimidation as well. But really, white metal and plastic, they're actually quite similar to work with. White metal has some advantages over plastic, and so the advantage is also the disadvantage, right? It's malleable, so that you can correct shape issues, which is a huge advantage over plastic. It's much harder to straighten plastic for because it gets plastic deformation when it bends, so it often changes shape permanently, whereas this stuff seems to not be like that. It remains in the elastic stage unless you overbend it too much, so it's easy to straighten and get back into shape. Disadvantage, of course, is that it gets bent easily. So the strength and the weakness all in the same physical property. Anyways, quick update. Next step, well, it wasn't so quick, we're at 15 minutes. I think what I'm going to do next check-in, I'm going to go ahead and start laying some paint down, obviously clean this mess up. And then I'll start laying some paint down and start working on the front part of the chassis. So I think at the beginning of this series, or this episode 5, I talked about getting the chassis front and back done, which I've kind of changed my mind. That'll probably take a bit too much for this, so I'll probably end this episode when I've sort of finished up with step 9. Sorry, that's upside down. With step 9, we'll have this front part done for the most part. I don't think there's much after that, and then the next step is starting to work on the back part. So I probably break that into a separate episode. I think we're over half an hour of footage, usable footage right now of updates and whatnot. So that's usually a good place to pause, maybe a little bit more than that. And then there's a lot of work on that back half. It includes the cockpit and whatnot. So yeah, and then we'll go from there. So that's probably what we'll do next episode. Next check-in, I should say. I'll show you, get some painted parts, maybe do a little bit of assembly, and if there's any things to note there, we'll do a check-in on any things in particular, but it might just be a check-in on sort of that finished up to step 9. So we'll see how it goes. If there's anything of interest to show you, I'll check in with that. Otherwise, I'll be back in a minute and we'll have some paint on some stuff. So we'll see in a bit. Hey, just a quick check-in where I'm at. I got everything all painted and ready to go, more or less. I just wanted to do a quick check-in before I start putting it together. I decided to go, the instructions call out for all the suspension bits to be silver. Model Factory Hiro is quite vague on some things. I think oftentimes they just say to paint shit silver when they didn't know what color it would be. Unless it was like a polished alloy or something, I don't think it would be so, unless it was painted silver, I guess, in real life. But, for all the suspension arms and steering linkage and everything, all this kind of stuff, they're calling for silver. But, the best I can kind of figure out is most of this stuff would have been either cast or forged steel. Maybe fabricated, like these arms might be fabricated from steel tube. I highly doubt they'd be aluminum, just looking at the size of them and whatnot in the era. I doubt they'd be fabricated aluminum. So I'm just sort of going with the premise that they're, either cast or forged steel. And, back in the day, I'm having, like I say, hard time finding reference photos, but, all the black and white ones from in period that I can find are vague at best. But, it kind of looks like it's a natural finish forged suspension piece, which is what you'd find on, your car today or whatnot in some cases. So, anyways, that's what I've gone with for that kind of stuff. Give it a bit of patina. This build is going to be in period, sort of as it was raced, so a little bit of dirt and grime on various things, but more or less clean, but not like it just finished a race, but in between races or whatnot. So I've put a little bit of dirt on the frame. I don't know if that's focusing on the frame. Let's see if we can pick that up a little bit better. So the lower part of the frame is showing some dirt and grime on it. The upper parts I left more or less clean, where they clean what they could, and as they go, right? So that's sort of the premise on this. The other thing I just wanted to show you was how the radiator turned out. So I think I talked about this earlier, what I did here. So I sanded and polished the white metal for this to get a really nice finish, and then I used the Tamiya metal primer, which is clear, which is actually quite interesting. On the polished surface, it turns out quite glossy. It would actually probably make a really good protective coating if you just wanted to leave something polished bare metal. So it would probably work really good for that, and then if you want to do some weathering, it would pick up that nicely. So anyways, but what I did in this case is, after I primed it with that, I used, it's one of the new super metallic colors called Rich Silver or Rich Gold from Mr. Hobby. So I lightly sprayed over that, over this with that to get the sort of a polished brass look. And I think it turned out really well. Like you can kind of see there's still sort of the polishing marks left on here. So that was kind of my intent. But then I also went over this with some Mr. Hobby weathering color, which is a oil-based product. I don't think it's an enamel. I think it's an actual oil paint. And I used, I think, the stain brown or the dark brown, I can't remember, to knock down a bit of the luster. Oh, sorry, I polished the gold after I painted it with Tamiya finish polish. I didn't go all 3 steps. I just used the finish one to get it quite shiny, and it worked really well. It polished up quite nice. And then I just used some of that Mr. Weathering to knock down a bit of the sheen and give it a bit of patina in color. So it doesn't show up too well on the camera, I don't think. We'll see. It doesn't show up well on my monitor, but the footage often looks better when I watch it back than what I see in the monitor. So that's what I ended up doing there. I'm pretty pleased with that, the way that turned out. It kind of gives it, like it was polished at one point, now it's been used, it's starting to tarnish a bit. So, and that's what I'm kind of going with there. So yeah, that's where we're at. I got, just mix up a bit of colors like the spring perches. I'm just assuming they're made out of turned aluminum, so it will go with that. It'll give it a bit of contrast and visual interest on everything. So that's what we're rolling with. I got these 2 pipes, the 2 long ones, that one and that one. I haven't painted yet. I still got to do the final fitting once the engine's in. Because they have to go and join up with some pipes that go to the back of the car. So I just got to make sure they're aligned properly, and I'll get everything fitted and aligned once the engine's in. And then I'll paint those up and put the hose joints on them. So yeah, it's coming along pretty good. The sway bar, I don't know if you remember, one of the links was busted off, so I just soldered it back on. Can't tell. I don't know which one broke. I actually can't even tell which one was broken off. Sorry, I'm looking to see if I can tell. I think it was this one. But I just quickly soldered that back on, and it broke right, where it meets the sort of flat part there. So yeah, that worked out well. Yeah, other than that, like I say, got sort of a light gray on the frame. I don't know what else to say at this point. Rad's looking good. Everything's, I think, coming together. Just for the curious, this is about 250 pieces that's sitting here right now, including like all the pieces that were involved in for the engine and everything. But all added up, this is 250 pieces, and we'll have the front section of the frame done. Not complete. There's still more to go on after this. So, like the brakes and other little pieces. So the next thing I got to do before I actually get the engine and the chassis, and I got to remember to do this, is I got to build some brake lines to go. The master cylinders, they'll be up here somewhere. This is the brake fluid reservoir. It goes right there. So I got to build some hard lines that just run on the inside of the frame, tee out to the 2 corners, because they don't give you anything there, and I think it's visible enough that you should, or that I want to include them. So anyways, that'll be the next step. I'll just quickly fab up some brake lines and then start assembling this, and my next check-in will be probably the little closing check-in on this episode where we have everything together, and yeah, so we'll see you in a little bit. Hey, just a quick check-in. As you can see, just working on getting everything assembled into the chassis. So I've got all the front suspension mounted, obviously, as you can see here. And I did all that first, and then I put the engine in. So as you may recall, I changed the order operations a little bit for the assembly. Let's just get the instructions in here. You know, as you can see here, the way they wanted this built up was, you know, you build up part of the chassis. They actually, what they wanted to do is build the suspension separately up here, right on its cross beam or its cross member there, to build that all up separately, build the chassis up, you know, without that in it. Then what I figured they wanted obviously was to install the engine first. It's got its bits sticking out the back and the front, so it doesn't fit straight down into the chassis if everything was assembled. So I understand the rationale, but I didn't like having to put this piece onto all this after I had everything else in, the engine in. It's, you know, these joints would have been difficult to get assembled properly and look good after everything was painted. So I changed it up. I put this all in together, as you recall, without the suspension components on it, so I could finish the frame, which is what I've done. Then I put I ended up putting the let's get this out of the way. Then I got all the suspension components installed. You know, as you can see there, I got some parts hanging off of this, but it's all in there, installed. I tried to get the ride height the same on each side. Whether it's actually in the right spot, I have no idea, because there is no reference for that. It's just hopefully where it is where it's supposed to be. And then I put the engine in, and as you recall, I left this is the steering gear that sort of bolts to the top of the engine. I left all that off. Let's just give you a sideways look at that. I left all that off, and the bell housing, which is what I'm holding on to right now, so that I could put the engine in forward, get this part under, see it goes under there, and then get it to sit down, and I just installed that stuff afterwards. So that all worked out well. Right now I'm just working on some of the oil pipes. That's one that just fell off here. It's got a bit of an interesting setup. I don't know which one's the feed and which one's the return. It doesn't really matter, but sort of what we got going on here is we got an oil pump that comes out of the engine, goes to the front here, which this is some rudimentary oil cooler, I would imagine, is what they're doing here. You know, so you got a pipe here that goes from the engine to that, so I've got it fitting pretty well. Now, so I can finish it off, I got to put the hose joints on it, so that's that one. And then there's one that comes out of here, and it runs down the side. I don't know if we can see that. It runs down the side there and carries on to the back. So there's another pipe that obviously joins up with it that goes down. So I just made a little template of that's what this tape here is, so I know where those holes were, so I could get it bent to relatively the right spot, to where it's supposed to go. So that's all fine. Well, what's interesting is the pipe I'm talking about, this one here, they actually have you install that way farther forward in the instructions. Like, you get all the rear part done and everything, and then you put that in along with this front cage, which is quite odd order of operations in my opinion. So anyways, I'm doing that now. There's another pipe in here. I don't know if I can squirrel it out. So anyways, that's, you know, I think the oil comes out of the engine into this cooler. It might go the other way around, doesn't matter. And then it goes back here. So both those, and then it carries on back to the oil tank, which is right in the back of the car. Then there's another line that'll come from the tank forward, and that goes to, that's, I don't know if you can't see it. You can see there is another oil line here, which is just sitting there. This got it bent into shape, and again, it goes through the chassis to the back, the same spot as the other one does, so the template serves for both of those, just to get them lined up properly. So that's what I've been working on. I've just been getting these, and this one, This is when in the instructions you install this one. But man, this one's super fiddly to get in there. You gotta snake it in under. There's not a whole lot of room. Actually, I probably have to do some more straightening on it. But anyways, we got it to fit. So why they have you do these two and then not do this one yet and leave it till way in the future? Let's just skip forward. So right now we are working on step 8, which you can see is when we put those two ones. This is the one I just took out that snakes in through the frame and then back out to that spot, and then the other one is right there. Then we go on and do a bunch of the steering gear. The rest of the steering gear here, this is the lower rad pipe. And we put the rad in, the suspension on. And then we switch over to the back side of the frame, start building it all up. And then we carry on with the rear suspension, which is up here. Finish off the rear suspension. We join the two components together, the front and the rear. And we work, these are the two oil pipes I'm talking about, but at the back end, these will join up with the tank at the back. We get all that together, and then we finally, over here, put that oil pipe back at the front, which is really odd. And same with this hoop and its two supports, which, I skipped ahead and I already put those on so that I could paint them with the chassis and I could solder them as well. So anyways, just a bit of an odd order of operations, and then step 18 is that, this front pipe and this front part of the frame of the chassis, and then the seat, it's weird order of operations. I don't know why they didn't have us finish this front part off earlier, especially this pipe. You're doing all the other pipes, why wouldn't you do that one at the same time? So anyways, I've deviated a little bit. Anybody building this car or the other versions of it, I imagine they're the same. So I suggest that, you're doing all this pipe work up here anyways. Sorry, it's upside down for you. You're doing all that pipe work up here anyways. Why would you not put the third pipe that's part of this set, essentially, in place as well? So anyways, that would probably be, it's either the feed back to the engine or it's the return, and the other two are the feed. I don't know. Doesn't really matter. So that's where I'm at. Just wanted to check in, to let you know that it's possible to get the engine in. It wasn't a struggle or anything like that, and what that allowed me to do was have a complete chassis, or the front part of the chassis 100% complete. I don't have any other components of the chassis that need to be glued in, after they've been painted or whatever. So that worked out quite well, and it's all fairly robust. Other than those tubes, that's about the only other things at the to be messing around. And tubes in the radiator, I guess, and this whole front part will be complete. So I'm going to carry on. I actually, this pipe I painted previously when I was doing a bunch of other work. These ones are not. These are just in bare white metal. So those two. So I'll have to just quickly give them a bit of paint. As you can see, they're actually not too different a color. It's hard to tell that this one's painted versus these ones being raw. They're a slightly duller because they've been sanded and handled, so a little bit tarnished. So anyways, I'll just prep those two up now. I think I've got them as straight as they need to be. I can tweak them a little bit as I'm installing them. They're more or less going to the right spot. Oops, I probably didn't. So that's good. This one's actually horribly molded. It's kind of oval shaped, but once it's all installed in the chassis, you won't really notice that. It'll look fine. So anyways, I'm going to go and get those prepped and then carry on getting that installed. And then it's the radiator, the steering gear and the radiator, and we'll probably check back in, and that'll be the end of this episode. Will be the next time you see me, so stay tuned. All right, there we go. Got everything all assembled. So that brings us up to the end of step 9 of the assembly, and yeah, here's the finished product. It's rather chunky, but I think it turned out quite well. Had all the suspension on it, all radiators mounted, the rad hoses, all that good stuff. And as we talked about, so that's, up to the end of step 9, plus a bit of work from further up. I think it was step 18 or 19 was this piece here, this hose here, which you can't really see, the one that runs on the outside there, as well. The only thing I've left off is the reservoir here, which is for the brake fluid, which I will I'll wait till I get the other part of the chassis on that has the the brake reservoirs on it. It'll sit in here somewhere. They kind of sit under the carbs. Anyways, I'll get that on before I put that on, because I need to run hoses down to the master cylinders. So yeah, that brings us to the end. Fairly excited to have this done. I think that the brass work that I did on the radiator turned out quite nice. I did a little distressing on the front, not much, just a very little bit. It's quite subtle, just to simulate a bit of wear and use. So pretty happy with that. I think I've said that 3 times now, so it must be true. Anyways, so that is that. That brings us up, like I say, to the end of step 9 here, which is a pretty significant bit of the build. I think there's 30 steps in total. So theoretically we're a third of the way through, but I think it's more than a third of the way in terms of the number of parts used. There's a lot of steps coming up that don't have a high parts count. So anyways, that will bring us to the end of this episode. So in the next episode we'll start on the rear part of the chassis and get it all built up. Probably up to the point where we're starting to get everything joined together. Get the dash done. Pretty much, I'll probably finish all that, get it all done up to probably the end of step 19. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, she's moving along. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed that. I appreciate you guys watching and commenting and telling me what you think. It's always appreciated. So stay tuned for the next episode. Thanks for watching. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.